Drum rolls. We are kicking off season two of the podcast, and you are my first guest. And with that, I'll quickly get you introduced. So, we have with us Vignesh Krishnan, who is a fellow Teach for India Fellowship and staff alum. And you were with TFI for almost 7, 8 years?
12 years.
Wow. Okay. What am I missing? Well, we'll talk about that. And currently, he is the Global Expansion Director at Crystal House International, where he works towards expanding the school network to reach a wider set of children in newer geographies. He's a 2018-19 Chevening scholar who pursued a master's in effective learning and teaching at the Institute of Education and University College London. And yeah, that's just the tip of the iceberg. So let's get started and learn more about you, Vignesh. And if you can start us off from, just taking us back to the time when you were young and, growing up, what are the experiences, the inflection points that sort of got you here?
Great. Firstly, thanks, Merlin, for the invitation. Lovely to be here again. I grew up basically in a small town in the southern part of Kerala named Palakkad, which sort of is a bordering town to Tamil Nadu, to Coimbatore. My schooling happened actually in two distinct parts of Kerala. So my dad used to work in a transferable job. So he used to get transferred every few years. So I had the fortune of studying in the southern part, which is in Palakkad, and also in the northern part of Kerala, which is very different from the south of Kerala, which is in Kannur, for several years. And post school, after grade 12, I decided not to join a traditional full time college and sort of self designed a range of experiences to engage in. It was quite a bold move. Me, along with four other friends, sort of did that. So I was basically volunteering for a small non-profit in Chennai. So we moved from Kerala all the way to Chennai because we also wanted to see what is out there in a city. So also ended up pursuing an undergrad from University of Madras, but didn't really go to a college basically. And parallelly was also studying corporate laws. So I pursued the company secretaryship program. And parallelly, I was also interested in filmmaking. So was doing some, part-time screenwriting sort of course as well in Chennai. So it was quite a lot of things that I ended up doing looking back over those 3 to 4 years. And I think that volunteering stint with a small nonprofit was really the first inflection point, if I can think of, in terms of what it got me to the development sector early on. I have always wanted to do something in education. A little bit of a backstory is that my grandfather, my mom's dad, basically pre-independence moved from the southern part of Kerala to the northern part to this hill station named Wayanad, back in the 1930s, and worked as a zamindar. Worked under a zamindar for several years. And when India got independence and when the land reform measures took place in Kerala under the Communist Party, my grandfather got a lot of land from the zamindar, right? And he realized very soon that the land that he got by where he was there had this tribal community that hadn't gotten out of that place for probably 200 plus years, right? Like has not seen a world outside that community. And he was someone who himself did not go to school beyond grade 3, but self-taught to read and write multiple languages. So he knew the power of education, what it can do to sort of, like lift you out of poverty, right? So he decided to start a school. They started the first school in that village, started a cooperative bank, built roads,
Wow.
unsuccessfully contested elections in that place. But his story was, quite, fascinating in many, many ways, right? Like, because when I grew up, I haven't seen him. He actually passed away when my mom was about 11 or 12 years old. So But when I grew up, like, I mean, every time I would go to Wayanad for my summer break, and would always hear of his story from different people. And that's when I sort of learned the legacy that he's left, right? And in particular, the school was a game changer. Even now, that's probably the only school within a vicinity of 5 to 6 kilometers in that village. But it has actually gotten several generations out of poverty, right? Like, I mean, it's given them educations, made them more mobile, etc., right? Like, so that was always there in my sort of heart to do something in education, but did not really know what to do, right? So while I was in Chennai, I remember sitting in a cafe. I had gone to meet somebody, and on my way back there was this poster outside the cafe that said, "Are you ready for a challenge?" And I didn't really see Teach for India, but it had this bold sort of like like statement, right? Like, and I was like, "Well, this looks like a cool ad, and let me go back and search what this Teach for India thing is," right? Like, and that's how I bumped into like, I mean, the program, and thought it was a great opportunity to teach, which I really like to do, and also an opportunity which had some money to survive and experiment for 2 years. So I thought, if I get through, I'll go and teach and figure out things beyond 2 years.
What a story. And
Yeah.
like, oh, love that. And also, so many questions. One is, when you were designing the college course for yourself, did your parents not have any say in that? Because my parents would have freaked out. I mean, they freaked out with me wanting to do Teach for India after doing economics honors. And I'm wondering if for you also your parents were like, excuse me, like that's not a, traditional path to take.
Looking back, I didn't realize how liberal my parents were, right? Like, I mean, for the less exposure that they had, honestly, right? Like, I mean, my mom, for instance, have hardly traveled outside of Kerala or Tamil Nadu, right? Like, I mean, my dad has in some way or the other because of work, but you wouldn't expect a middle class parents basically allowing their kids to not go to a traditional college, right? Like, I think what helped was two things. One was I had a bunch of four other friends who were all doing well academically, and all of us were very influential in each other's families in some way. So we sort of supported each other. So that was one. I think second was that we had charted out some plan for what our time in Chennai would look like. So, for example, some of them said we are also going to pursue chartered accountancy. I said I'll also do corporate law. So there was some professional sort of degree that we had committed to doing, apart from a bunch of other experiments, which I think really helped. And they thought that we would give up in a year, right? Right. Like, I mean, they thought that maybe a year this guy would survive, and then, like, I mean, he'll just come back to us and probably he'll go to college. But that didn't happen. After 1 year, when they learned that I had survived, and I was really enjoying the experience, they just let me be. So TFI was not a problem at all, honestly. When I got into TFI, my father was like, "Oh, maybe another experiment, and he's gonna like do something else, right?"
I mean, you reassured them with the right words. And I think even like 10 years into the space, even for me, like my parents, like my dad's very proud of whatever I've done. But there are days he'll be like, so when are you going to get a real job? Like, when is this going to, you know? So yeah, I mean, having supportive parents is, so helpful. And the second thing I resonated with when you were saying is, are you ready for a challenge? Is the same poster that I saw at Stephens when I was studying. And I remember the classroom I got in Mumbai was a really, really tough classroom. And I wanted to quit every single day. But what kept me going is, those four words, that are you ready for a challenge? You knew this was going to be challenging. So there is no exit and you have to sort of chart away. So, yeah, amazing. So in
Yeah.
2011, yeah, you were saying something.
I was just saying that I keep telling this to a lot of people that those 3 years pre TFI, roughly 4 years, was fun at the same time, extremely, traumatic in many ways, because every other day somebody would tell you what you're doing is really stupid, right? Like, so I thought those 4 years was so intense that those 2 years of fellowship was nothing for me, honestly. I had a ball of a time in those 2 years. A lot of people keep saying that it is so challenging, etc. It was definitely challenging in many ways. But when I compare it with those 4 years where I thought I had the most pivotal life lessons that I learned, in those 4 years of like really figuring out things all by myself. And that too, like when you move out of a very traditional school to trying to do something, you're not used to, designing your own learning yourself. You're always told what you should be learning. And then you move into a territory where you're saying, okay, let me figure it out all by myself, is a completely different ball game.
So you had a lot of courage when you were, what, 16, 17, to sort of, curate your own journey. So love that for you. Okay, so now it's 2011. It's your first year of TFI fellowship. You're in Delhi. So take us through the journey of the fellowship and then how it was on being a staff and then what led you to do your master's.
So I was placed in the northeast of Delhi, in between Silampur and Jafrabad. Really the hotbed of where the riots happened in 2019-20. If you remember, the Delhi riots happened exactly in the same place in the communities where I thought. Right. And even then, that used to be an extremely sensitive place. And I was told by several of my Delhi friends that even when the 1984 riots broke out, when Delhi was very sensitive for many, many weeks, that part of Delhi was supposedly extremely, unsafe, and also very, very tricky to sort of like travel and navigate. So that was my first, intro to that part of Delhi. But my experience was so different, right? Like, which I think a lot of people who have worked in Silampur and Jafrabad would allude to it, that how incredibly generous and welcoming most people are, right? Like the relationships that I have built with the families and the kids, right? Like which continues to be a big part. In fact, there are around 10 to 12 of my students that I thought who are really good friends with me today, right? Like, we in fact bounce off ideas. We in fact share things with each other, and they're all grown up adults now. But those 2 years, Merlin, was, very interesting in many ways for me. I remember the first day in the classroom, this little 8-year-old coming to me and asking, Ki, Bhaiya, are you a Muslim or a Hindu? Right? Like, and I didn't know why this kid was asking me this question, right? Like, and that's when I realized that there was a lot of unset tension between the two communities. And parents in the first parent teacher meeting coming to me and saying, I don't want my child to sit with somebody with another religion, so on and so forth, right? Like, so it was a first hand experience of experiencing something that I had not experienced before, especially coming from Kerala, right? Like, I don't remotely remember anyone talking about religion or caste in Kerala, right? Like, I think probably that's the like one of the perks of being in a communist run state. So that was my initial beginning, Merlin. And after 2 years, I honestly did not know what to do. Right. Like I knew that I loved to teach. I knew that I wanted to work with teachers and I wanted to continue to be in education. But I didn't know anything beyond that. I didn't know what my pathway would look like. None of those. The only other thing that I knew was I wanted to be in Delhi so that I would be in touch with the students that I taught. So these were the three things that I knew, right? Like, and TFI, staff role happened. It was, I think, the intersection of being able to work with children and also with adults really happened, right? Like with the program manager role, where I ended up working with a bunch of 15 new fellows
Yeah.
from 2013. So that was the beginning of, being on staff. Spent about 7.5 years, cumulatively with the Teach for India Delhi team, and then took a short break to go and do masters. Then I rejoined Teach for India Hyderabad to lead the city for about 4 years before I transitioned out last year. So yeah, that's a
Right.
little bit on my career.
Right. So yeah, so tell us more about the masters, like you've done 7 years in the education space, in classroom, in coaching roles. So what led you to do the masters and what were the learnings you came back with? And especially because you came back to Teach for India, was there something different in the way you were operating or how you were putting your learnings to use? I'm curious to know about that. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So, one is that 4.5 years into my career, I started realizing how I was running out of depth in terms of being able to think beyond the frameworks that TFI sort of teaches you to, right? Like, so I felt like I was more or less in a bubble, right? Like, but I kept telling myself that I'm not going to get admissions anywhere because I didn't go to a traditional college for my undergrad. And I didn't have great, sort of scores in my undergrad. So I remember telling my ex-manager Akanksha Gulati that look, nobody's going to take me into any grad school. And she's like, no, are you kidding me? You're done. Your body of work speaks a lot. You should definitely try. And I kept telling her, no, that's not going to happen. So for almost 2 years after this thought came into my head, I kept giving excuses to myself, right? And 2017, I had committed to apply to my friends and also to my manager. And still, I was just procrastinating for the longest time, right? And I remember 2 days before evening deadline, my very good friend Anurag Kundu just forced me to apply to Chevening, right? Like, he's like, no, you're going to apply. So I'm like, are you mad? Nobody's going to give me scholarship. And I'm thinking about not even getting an admission in college. You're talking about a scholarship that takes about 1% of people who apply. So he's like, no, no, you just apply and we look into it. And I wrote a really half-hearted, shoddy application within 24 hours. And, he just said, you have to rewrite everything. Then I rewrote everything in those 48 hours. And I just applied, right? Like, and I was like, okay, done and dusted. And, nobody is going to call me for this. And then there you go, 3 months later, I get a interview invite. And I was like, what has happened?
Yeah.
Somebody has called me for an interview. And then parallelly, I was applying to grad school programs. I was very clear I wanted to study education and learn about what education, in particular, what quality education in multiple contexts really look like, right? Like, and that's where I picked up this program on effective learning and teaching, which is a multidisciplinary master's, which had areas ranging from school leadership to assessments to looking at global education policy, etc.
Understood.
Um, and cheating happened, Merlin, and I decided to sort of move to the UK for the 1 year masters.
Quick follow up there, and I know a lot of people would be keen to learn this because I did not know that without having a traditional college degree grades, this was possible, right? So how did you maneuver the administrative roadblocks? Because I'm sure Chevening understands that your body of work is speaking for what you bring to the table. But what about the colleges? Like, how did you do that?
That's a great question. So you need an undergrad degree, which I had, right? Like otherwise, I wouldn't have been in a TFI program as well. It's
Yeah.
just that I didn't go to a traditional college, right? Like, and interestingly, none of the colleges required you to go to a full-time college. They were all fine with you having a degree, right? But there was a catch. All of the top universities, Oxford, UCL, and Edinburgh, where I had applied and I had gotten through, all of them had a minimum, eligibility grades, which was, I think, about 75 to 80% or something around those lines.
Right.
And I probably had some 50 or 55%. So I was nowhere close to even being able to apply. So I remember writing to the program heads of all of the programs across these three universities where I applied to, telling them that my undergrad has no relationship to my master's and what I had done in the last 7 years, very briefly.
Right.
Very interestingly, all three of them, all three course heads across these three universities said, why don't you apply? We look into it case to case basis, right? So I was quite surprised. So I did go ahead and apply, and there you go. They did select me for the masters in these three, and so I tell the story to a lot of people that unlike India, where you have a very high emphasis on just grades, and understandably so because of the population that you're dealing with for admissions, that's not the case abroad.
That's lovely. Wow. This is, I mean, yeah, this segment, I'll ensure that it reaches everyone because a lot of people just self-reject thinking, oh, don't have a college degree, don't have sufficient scores, cannot possibly. Yeah. So this will help a lot of people not to self-reject. So thanks so much for that. Yeah, my shifting gears, and I'm wanting to understand a little bit more about what you do currently. And also, very curious to now pose the question in retrospect now when you look back at all the years you've spent in the education space, is there any problem statement that you are looking to solve? I know you love teaching. I know that you've done strategy and operations and it's all been in the education space, but and it for me it's like every 2 years I want something like new problem to solve, but within the education space. For you, is there like a pattern, a theme that's coming across? What has been that progression for you? Yeah.
My work, Melon, over the last 13 years has always been in service of trying to solve for quality in education,
Yeah.
right? Um, I was very clear right from the beginning that I didn't want to chase large scale impact, and be working with the government or working with organizations that work at a systemic level to trying to primarily solve for foundational literacy and numeracy and areas similar to those, right? So I was very clear that that's not going to get us to quality. At the same time, I was also cognizant that working in organizations like Teach for India and the likes of TFI is also not going to get to the scale. But I was very keen to know, what does it really take to run great schools? What does it really take to sort of run great schools serving children from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds? And there are hardly any examples, with the exception of probably a handful of 5 or 6 schools that are out there, which truly you can say are cutting edge schools that are serving children from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds, right? And I've always been a firm believer that to get to the quality that I had in my mind, growing up in my career, I was very clear that it takes a decade or more. It's not something where you're going to get to, in like 2 years or in 3 years. So it's not a sprint. It is a marathon that you're going to get into. So that is something that I was very, very clear. And you are in education, and you also know how most of the discourse and the investment that is coming in today is largely driven towards FLN,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And while I do believe that's important, I also think parallelly there's a lot of money that needs to be invested in trying to see how to reimagine schools, how to reimagine schools that are serving children from socioeconomically disadvantaged background, right? So that is what got me from TFI to Crystal House, because what Crystal House is trying to do, for instance, is that while Crystal House as a network of schools across the globe is values academic outcomes and serves children from socioeconomically disadvantaged background, what we measure for is long-term life outcomes, right? That's something that we sort of measure for. And one of the indicators that we look for is that we look at the income levels of children over a 10 to 12 year period. And we also look at, the quality of jobs that they get into. So those were indicators that really fascinated me. And, that's what got me to Crystal House, basically. So in a nutshell, that's what I'm trying to basically do, over the last 10 plus years in education. Yeah.
Interesting. I would definitely want to read up more about this. So that brings us to the end of the first segment of the podcast. Since the season two, I have introduced something new which I didn't share with you earlier. So it's a rapid fire round, Vignesh. Okay, we have about 10 questions, but you get to pick five to answer. So I'm going to read out a question. You can say pass if you don't want to answer it. If you're answering it, you get a minute to answer it. Yeah. Okay. So your first question is, what would you do if you won the lottery?
Pass.
Who is the most influential person in your life and how did they impact you?
My mother, actually. My mother, when I think of her, she is probably the most, inspiring community builder that I know of. Like, I mean, has been a homemaker, never worked, in traditional jobs. But
Okay.
the way how she is anchored and got together our families over the last, like 30 years since I've known her, is just phenomenal. She continues to inspire me every single day.
Love that. How do you want to be remembered?
I want to be remembered as somebody who has, definitely, made, what do you say? Like, I mean, change in a bunch of people's lives for sure.
What's the most important lesson you've learned in life?
Us.
What's something people would be surprised to know about you?
That I am, like, I mean, I am a great cook and somebody, who aspires to start a restaurant in the second phase of my career at probably 10 years down the line.
Wow, amazing. And okay, fourth question. What's your favorite quote?
Be the change you wish to see.
What's the best advice a mentor ever gave you about this industry?
What I mentioned earlier, which is basically that this is not a sprint, but this is a marathon. And if you want to succeed, in this sector, it's critical to, stay on the track and not really worry about the outcomes of where you are getting to, especially in the early years.
So that brings us to the end of rapid fire round. I actually want to go back to the question about you wanting to set up your restaurant. Do you want to like verbalize it and like manifest it on the podcast, or do you want to keep it to yourself and tell people when it is up there, ready and running?
No, no, I mean, there's no plan at all. I mean, so I have had this childhood dream of setting up an idli dosa shop in the mountains,
Right.
And one of the problems that I see in the northern part of India is that there aren't great South Indian restaurants that serve great idlis and dosas, with the exception of probably, like the big cities,
Right.
right? And I've been dreaming of this idea of starting a small chain of like idli dosa shops in the northern part of India, maybe 10 years down the line. So that's really what I'm thinking of.
And the last question is if you could leave us with any recommendations on things you read, listen to, any movies to watch.
Yeah, definitely. I have a lot of those. So I'm listening to, or rather, I have been listening to two podcasts for over 2 years now. One is Amit Verma's Seen and the Unseen. It's something that I've been listening to for a while now. And there's another person by the name Vishal Kandelwala who, does this podcast by the name Inner Game, and he also has another podcast by the name The 1% Show. It's where he brings celebrities and individuals across multiple sectors to talk about how they have progressed in their career. And it's a fascinating, fascinating podcast, right? I just finished reading a month and a half back this lovely book by the name The Day I Became a Runner by Shohini Chattopadhyay, which basically tracks the history of women athletes since pre-independence till now. So it's a story of 10 very inspiring, women athletes from India. So that's something that I absolutely loved. Also, currently reading this book, the Ratan Tata A Life by Thomas Matthew, which is a new book that got launched. Very interesting to learn about what Tata has done over a 3 to 4 decade long career. The other one that, in terms of movies, hmm, I can tell you like one of the movies that I recently watched is a Tamil movie by the name Mayaragan. Mayaragan is on Netflix, and I highly recommend folks to watch that movie. It's a beautiful movie that, for especially for people who have grown up in smaller towns, will resonate with that a lot in terms of, moving out of a small town to a big city and what that does to you, and, how you sort of really, when you go back to the smaller town, remains those early memories, etc. So it's a beautiful, beautiful movie.
Yeah. Thank you for these recommendations, Vignesh. And also, thank you so much for making the time to be on the show.